picture postcard perfection. Tourists are back in Venice, but they won't be arriving anytime soon on large cruise ships. It follows years of debate about banning mega cruise ships to protect Venice's lagoon ecosystem. That debate became much more heated with the arrival in June of a towering 90,000-ton ship. The government finally announced the ban in July, after threats from UNESCO to place Venice, a World Heritage Site, on its endangered list. Italy is promising to cover lost wages for thousands of workers who rely on the cruise industry to keep them afloat.
We hope the government comes up with a way for us to continue. A subsidy might last a year or two, but this decree says ships won't pass through anymore. We need certainty for our future.
This is the Giudecca Canal, which cuts right through the heart of Venice, passing by St. Mark's Square. And it's this very artery through which these huge ships will no longer be able to pass. But that doesn't mean they'll be completely blocked from the Venetian lagoon.
The plan is to have large cruise ships enter the lagoon through a back channel and dock at the mainland industrial port of Marghera. The problem is the port isn't ready to receive cruise passengers. City Councilor Marco Gasparinetti grew up along Venice's canals. He welcomes the ban but sees it as a distraction.
It's a visible part of the iceberg. The visible tip is the big ships, but we have many other problems, and the big ships are not the only one.
And what are those problems?
The fact that the city is dying in terms of being a living place with the citizens living inside and not having to commute to get a job which cannot give you the chance to live in the city where you're just a commuter.
Maeve Kuchel is part of an organization that lobbied for the ban. She sees it as part of a larger push to focus on long-term sustainability.
All of that would be done not to shift the focus away from accommodating tourism to really fulfilling the needs of the local residents who depend also on the biodiversity of the lagoon and on the well-being of the whole environment here.
Venice rose as a commercial powerhouse centuries ago to the great benefit of its people. Finding a balance that keeps coffers full and residents from fleeing will take more than banning cruise ships from its waters. Adam Raney, Al Jazeera, Venice.
UNESCO often adds locations to its endangered list to draw global attention. Romania's Rosia Montana mining landscape was made a World Heritage Site last week, but it was also added to the danger list. That's because of threats to resume mining operations in the area. In 2019, islands and protected areas in the Gulf of California were determined to be in danger. That's largely because of the vulnerable situation of an endangered porpoise, made worse by illegal fishing practices. While Kenya's Lake Turkana National Parks were added to the danger list in 2018 after reported effects from a dam in neighbouring Ethiopia. Well, Asad Rehman's a spokesman for the COP26 coalition, which advocates for climate action, and he's joining us from London. It's good to have you with us on Al Jazeera, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Let's just talk about the situation in Venice, first of all. Why were these ships so apparently so damaging to the ecosystem in Venice?
Well, as your piece showed, these cruise ships are often the size of small cities. Some carry over 7,000 passengers. They dump huge amounts of sewage and other waste into our waters. They destroy valuable marine ecology. They pollute the seas, lagoons, beaches. And this industry, the cruise ship industry, has literally gone unchecked. They're building bigger and bigger ships with more and more passengers, producing more and more environmental impacts, including to World Heritage cities such as Venice, where they've damaged homes and businesses and, of course, have helped cause the flooding that threatens that city. Ultimately, their only goal is profit margins while making others pay the price for this pollution.
We often talk about air travel as being one of the primary emitters, if you like, or one of the primary impacts on climate change. Do you think the shipping around the world is actually overlooked? Because this, in many ways, is a story that, to those of us outside, that appears to be isolated predominantly to Venice and to Italy. But how widespread is it?
Well, it's very widespread. So let's, if we think about just this last 1 week, the floods, the famines, the extreme weather impacts that we've seen cause havoc all around the world. That's not just another warning that the climate crisis is not something that will happen in years to come. It's a warning that it's already here. and it's deadly for many. So to stop runaway climate change, and the billions of lives and livelihoods are going to be affected, requires huge changes in this decade. So that includes stopping polluting industries. And that's not just fossil fuels or aviation, it's also the shipping industry. Look, one person on one of those cruise ships is responsible in just 1 week for producing as much emissions as someone living in Africa does over a whole year. So, you know, tackling the shipping industry, tackling the cruise ship industry, tackling aviation, tackling fossil fuels, fixing our food system. We need to do all of these things because that's the scale of the challenge that is in front of us. And unfortunately, despite all of the alarm bells, we've had lots of hot air from governments, empty promises, but they aren't serious about cutting their emissions. And the emissions that they need to cut, what matters is what we do in the next 10 years. And they aren't putting in place policies so that people relying on those industries, exactly like the person you had on your piece, relying on those industries for work can be transitioned to new jobs. And they're not financing the measures that are needed to help, especially the poorest, to adapt to these crises. One start figure that we should remember, just in this last year of the COVID recovery, rich governments have spent something close to 16 trillion on the COVID recovery, but less than 2% of that has gone to low carbon economy measures. Much of it has gone to bailing out the same polluting companies that are causing this crisis, that are continuing to pollute. So we really need to have a real shift and a change from the sort of economic model and the one that says profit comes before sustainability and becomes before people and our environment.
So this ruling does ban ships, these large ships from the Venice Lagoon, but as Adam was just telling us in his report, they're basically being just redirected to another part of the city. So everything that you've talked about, all the levels of emissions that these ships are putting out still exist. Is this actually as much of a victory as environmentalists who've been fighting for this would have us believe?
Well, I think with all of these challenges, it's a David and Goliath situation. You have local communities, local people fighting decades-long struggles to raise issues and see these as the first step. So, of course, this doesn't solve the real problem. Of course, it doesn't go far enough. It's a first step, and I think many people would see it as literally only the first step. Really, the solution is going to be to ask ourselves, in this world that we live in now, can we afford to have these mega cruise ships where people are sailing around the world causing huge environmental impacts and damages? Can we afford to have these polluting industries continuing the way that they are? And frankly, the answer is no. So accommodating them, as Venice has done to try and build a new harbour, that's just shifting the problem and kicking the ball down into the grass. It's not really grasping with the real issue that we all face, which is how do you reduce emissions? How do you switch away from these polluting industries? How do we create a safer and cleaner and fairer world for everybody?
Good to get your thoughts on this. Asad Rahman, we appreciate your time, so thank you very much indeed.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.